Hey there, and welcome into another episode of the Route 1 Rundown, part of the Department of Hoops, a DMV media network. I always say if you eat, sleep, and breathe Maryland basketball, then this is the place for you. Well, if you eat, sleep, and breathe local hoops, then Department of Hoops is the place for you. We got Terps coverage right here on Route 1 Rundown. There's Wizards coverage, GW, Georgetown. If you're a local hoops fan, there's no better place for local hoops talk than a Department of Hoops, and I'm thrilled to be a part of that YouTube channel. So give us a follow there, subscribe. So much great hoops coverage going on if you're into local basketball. I'm your host, Steve Gorgie, and I'm thrilled to be back for another episode. Today, of course, I'm going to be reacting to the Terps' 76-75 win over Villanova up in Newark as the Terps move to 5-1 on the season. And there's a few ways I think you can take this game. For me, coming out of this win, and keyword there, a win, I choose to be optimistic coming out of it. I choose to be optimistic. I completely understand if you watch this game, if you've watched Maryland basketball for years and years and years, especially after that first half, and you say, I don't want to be optimistic about this game. There was a lot that didn't go right in that first half. There's some concerns with this team right now through 5 games. But coming out of that game, I choose to be optimistic. And I'm going to tell you why. Let me tell you why I sit here today, a few days before Thanksgiving. The Terps are 5-1. They survived this game against what looks like a maybe mediocre Villanova team, but a team that could be okay. That could challenge for the tournament. They're not off to a good start. This is not a vintage Jay Wright Villanova team, but they could be okay. Let me tell you why I sit here today and I say, I choose to be optimistic. I choose to take a bunch of positives coming out of that game. And it's for the same reasons that if you're listening to this and saying, what in the world are you talking about? The same reasons that you're saying, what in the world are you talking about? Because that first half that Maryland played on Sunday afternoon against Villanova was atrocious. It was terrible. Everything I talked about in the Villanova preview, they failed to do in the first half. I talked about winning the turnover battle because Maryland has been a team that's been very good this season at forcing turnovers and not turning the ball over. Jameer Brickus is really the only ball handler on that Villanova team. Well, they failed that miserably in the first half. 11 first half turnovers for Maryland. Villanova wins the turnover battle in the first half 11-7. Villanova wins the points off turnover battle 13-6. I talked about Eric Dixon, their big, and what a talented player he is. All Big East guy, a guy that can do a million different things, a guy that you really have to be aware of anytime he's on the court. Well, what did he do in the first half? Oh, I don't know. He only shredded the Terps to the tune of 22 points on 8 of 14 shooting in the first half. Shredded them. I talked about winning the battle from beyond the arc. Another thing that Maryland failed miserably at in the first half of that game. Villanova, in the first half of that game, I got it right here. I wrote it down. I wanted to make a point that I had these numbers in front of me. Villanova, 6 of 15, 40% from beyond the arc in the first half. Maryland, 2 of 10, 20% from three-point land against a team that has not defended the three very well at all this season. Against a team that gave up 90 points to Columbia, an Ivy League school, at home earlier this season. Maryland gets shredded in the first half by Nova from beyond the arc, largely by Eric Dixon there. They lose that battle as well. Everything I talked about in the preview, they didn't do in the first half of that game. And nevertheless, Maryland came back and they won the ball game. And that's why I choose to be optimistic coming out of this one. Because that first half was about as bad of a first half as you could have possibly asked for. But what became very apparent to me in the second half of this game, and it's not just this game, it's the comeback at the very end against Marquette as well, kind of factors into why I feel this way. It's very clear to me coming out of this game that this is a group that has a tremendous amount of confidence in themselves. They trust in one another, and collectively they possess a fight that you can't always teach. This team possesses a tremendous amount of fight in them. And that's one of the huge reasons I'm optimistic coming out of this. Because for a team to be down 12 at halftime, as bad as they played in that first half, to come back and find a way to win that game, just a few games after playing pretty well against Marquette, being up for much of the game, going down late and fighting back, battling back, only to lose in heartbreaking fashion, that says a lot to me, especially for a team in this era of college basketball that is largely new. It's guys that haven't necessarily played together for 3 years, 4 years. And I always worry in this era of college basketball, if a team that is new, that has a lot of disparate pieces, that hasn't been together for a while, and this Maryland team certainly fits that bill. I mean, all you have to do is look at kind of the top players on this team, and you have Derek Queen, a freshman. You have Julian Reese, a guy who's been there for 4 years. You have Jacoby Gillespie, a transfer. You have Rodney Rice, a transfer. Selton Miguel, a transfer. You know, there's a lot of guys coming from on their own ways. It's not like this is a group that came in a recruiting class together or 2 recruiting classes together and said, hey, we're gonna come to Maryland to build something under Kevin Willard. It's a different era of college basketball. It's not really how things work. And I always get concerned with teams like that do rely on a lot of transfers and freshmen and guys who haven't played together before. How much fight are they going to have? How much trust are they going to have in one another? How good is that chemistry going to be? Because there's something you can't measure. Like, I love advanced stats. I love analytics as much as anybody. But basketball is such a feel and flow game, such a chemistry game, that there's some things that you can't measure with stats. And that's one of them. And that's something that I'm always weary of in this era of college basketball. How quickly, how much fight our team's going to show. How quickly, if things are going bad, are they going to decide, not worth it today. This Maryland team, it doesn't have any quit in them. This Maryland team does not have any quit in them. Again, this is a team that I think has an incredible amount of trust in one another, an incredible amount of confidence in itself, and possesses a great amount of fight. And we saw it against Marquette, and we saw it against Villanova here, playing just about as bad as you can play in the first half of that ball game, but coming back and winning it. And part of why I think they have so much confidence, why they have so much trust, why they have so much belief, is because we saw what Derek Queen was able to do in that game. The Big Blizzard. That's what I've settled on as far as his DQ Derek Queen nickname. The Big Blizzard. He had a terrible first half himself. He did basically nothing. He turned the ball over a ton. I have the stats right here in front of me. If you want to see them, if you want to hear them, if you want to be reminded of them. Derek Queen in the first half of this game, he scored 4 points. And he had 4 turnovers. He had as many turnovers as he did points in that game. And he goes out and he frankly dominates the second half. Derek Queen finishes with 22 points, 11 boards, 5 assists in this game. And he was the centerpiece of the game plan in the second half. And he is a guy who was named Big Ten Freshman of the Week today. Well-deserved Big Ten Freshman of the Week. He is a guy that's supremely talented, and you saw in the second half of that game how many things he can do. We've seen it. If you've been watching this team through 6 games, you've seen it, albeit against lesser competition at times, how talented Derek Queen is, how many different things he can do. And you saw it with the Nikola Jokic step-back fadeaway that he pulled in the second half of that game, and that's the one that's making the rounds on social media, on Twitter, X, Blue Sky, wherever your Instagram, wherever you are on social media right now. That clip of Derek Queen being a baby Jokic is making its rounds, and it was an unbelievable play, no doubt about it. But what is so impressive to me about Queen in that second half is not just that, but you saw the way he's able to blow by guys on the perimeter. You saw the way he's able to get offensive rebounds. You saw his passing prowess. You saw how he's able to get in the post and hit a little hook shot. Make a nice little move in the post. Get position in the post. And again, his passing is always something that impresses me. So to come away from that game and you see the kind of player, the kind of talent Derek Queen is, I can't help but be optimistic coming out of that game, because you see that even within a game, he can grow. He is growing day in and day out, minute by minute. He struggled in the first half of that game, and Kevin Willard said in the postgame that Derek Queen and much of this team is still getting used to the physicality of playing a team like a Marquette, of playing a team like Villanova. And Derek Queen's still getting used to that. But you know what? He adjusted. That's what's most important. I'll never fault a guy or a team for being able to adjust, right? That's the most important thing in any sport to me, is can you see what a team throws at you, adjust, and make it work? And boy, oh boy, did Derek Queen make it work. Again, 22 points after just 4 in the first half. And he showed all the different things he can do. He also showed that he's a guy with incredible confidence in himself. And, you see it with some of the shots he takes at times, like that fadeaway step back. I mean, you got to have a lot of confidence to take that shot as a freshman, and he made it. Now, he took another similar one that didn't go in. He's taken some threes that haven't gone in, but he has confidence that he can take and make those shots. And you saw it, to me, at the end of the game. Maryland needed a bucket. He gets them a bucket with under a minute left. Maryland is in a position where they're down 1. They go to Derek Queen, a freshman who, again, gets to the bucket and gets fouled. And he goes to the line. He had not shot the ball very well from the stripe over the course of the day. 2 for 5. Going to the line with 21 seconds left. Down 1. What does he do? He drills both of them. Talk about a tremendous amount of confidence. So I can't say enough about what we saw from Derek Queen in that game, and that's a huge part of why I leave that game, despite how poorly they played in the first half of that one, feeling very confident and very excited about this Maryland team moving forward, because we haven't seen a talent like Derek Queen in quite some time. Don't get me wrong, we've seen really good players come through Maryland, even over the last 10 years, which haven't necessarily been the glory years of Maryland basketball. There have been very good players. There's a guy like Kevin Huerter, who's built a very successful NBA career for himself. Jalen Smith, Bruno Fernando, Alex Len. There's been a lot of good bigs. I mean, I just named 3 bigs right there who have been very good. Then you have the point guards like Melo Trimble and Anthony Cowan, who are very, very good and successful college players. 2 guys I think will end up in the rafters at some day, and that's a discussion I'd love to have at some point, not probably in season. But one of my favorite discussions to have with people is who should go up in the rafters first? Is it Anthony Cowan or is it Melo Trimble? I have my thoughts. That's a little tease. We'll get to that at some point when we're not in the midst of the season here. But we have not seen a guy with the talent level of Derek Queen in I don't know how long. I truly don't know how long, because his skill set is unique. The way he sees the game is unbelievable. You can run your entire offense through him, and it's not a guy who's just going to be a black hole and get the ball and take bad shots, and a lot of them will go in because he's supremely talented. He's a guy who sees the game and makes other players better. Playing next to Julian Reese, I truly believe Julian Reese, as accomplished as he is, I believe that playing next to Derek Queen is making him better, and I believe those 2 guys complement one another extraordinarily well. So that's a huge part of why I leave that game confident. Why I'm choosing to be positive coming out of that one is just how much we've seen Derek Queen grow in just 6 games. What we've seen Derek Queen be able to do, the skill set he's put on display in just 6 games. The last reason that I choose to be confident coming out of this is because you don't just have a Derek Queen on this team. You look at Eric Dixon and what he did for Villanova and how he carried that team and what he did in the first half. And, I thought Maryland played a better defensive game against him in the second half. I thought they made things a little more difficult for him in the second half. I thought they were a little more physical with him in the second half. He still had 16 points in the second half. He still ends up with 38 for the game. He still had a great look at the buzzer to win this thing that just didn't drop for him. But he took almost 50% of Villanova's shots. Eric Dixon in this game, he takes 29 field goals. Villanova took 62 for the game. Nearly 50% of their shots. But when you look at Maryland, and you look at what Maryland's done so far this year, as many headlines as Derek Queen has deservedly had written about him, as much hype as Julian Reese had come into the season, being a guy who is the senior leader, who's been a double-double machine over his time at Maryland. In this game against Villanova, a game that they had to, once again, come back from 12 down at halftime. They turned the ball over 11 times in the first half. You end up in this game with 4 different guys in double figures. Jacoby Gillespie, 12 points. Rodney Rice, 16 points. Julian Reese, 18 points. Derek Queen, 22 points. Always, when I think about teams that I like, when I think about teams that can advance in the tournament, that can accomplish things in their conference and in the regular season, that can get to the tournament, that can advance once they're there, I say, can you win left-handed? If a team takes away what you want to do, can you do something else to win? I love versatile teams. If you listen to my podcast, my other podcast at All Tailgate Till May, where I talk national college basketball and college football, I talk about that a lot with both sports, especially when I talk about gambling. Because I like to bet on teams when you think about futures, who can win their conference, who can advance, who can win a national championship. And I'm not saying Maryland's national championship caliber. I don't think they are. I'll just be clear about that. But I always think about teams that can play left-handed, that can win in a variety of ways. And I feel like Maryland can win in a variety of ways between those four guys. Those four guys, the two guards, Gillespie and Rice, and the two bigs, Reese and Queen, I think have really solidified themselves as the four major scoring threats on this Maryland team throughout the month of November. But you know what? Four is a lot more than the two that they had last year with Jahmir Young and Julian Reese. And it's really encouraging to me. There were moments in that first half where Rodney Rice hit big shots, and Rodney Rice goes 3 of 8 from beyond the arc. He has been a godsend as far as three-point shooting is concerned. Maryland is still not the greatest three-point shooting team in the world, but they're a lot better than they were last year from beyond the arc. At least they're above that 30% threshold, unlike last season, where they were one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the country. They're respectable, and that's all they needed to be, and that's been in large part because of Rodney Rice. He hit big shots. He hit a big shot in the first half where, things could have really gotten away from them early. They're down 15-5 early in the game, and he makes a big three. Then Maryland forces a turnover, and Rice gets fouled shooting a three. That's a big moment in the game, right? You don't always think about those moments over the course of a game, but to me, that matters because things can snowball, things can avalanche, things can get away from you. And a moment like that ensures things don't get away from you. That's the value of Rodney Rice. Jacoby Gillespie, he comes up with big baskets late in the game. I think as good as Anthony Cowan was, as good as Jahmir Young was, I don't want to say it quite yet, but Jacoby Gillespie, and we got to wait to see till he gets into Big Ten play and he faces the grind of the Big Ten because it can wear you down. It's a physical league that can wear you down. He looks like the same kind of quick guard that those two guys were. There was a moment in the second half of that game where kind of just got his defender going the other way for a split second. He identifies that and he blows by him, takes him to the rack, goes the other direction. And just that little bit of hesitation was enough for Jacoby Gillespie to get by his man. And that reminded me a lot of an Anthony Cowan. It reminded me a lot of a Jahmir Young. Now, again, we're going to see because the Big Ten can wear you down. I think we saw that happen to Jahmir Young. But I love the fact that you have a guy like Jacoby Gillespie where it's not all going to be on his shoulders. He's not going to have to put up 20 a night like Jahmir Young did. If Derek Queen's having an off night, he has Julian Reese. If Julian Reese gets into foul trouble, he has Derek Queen. If everything else is not fallen, you have Rodney Rice, who can go hit you an NBA 3 when you really need it. I like this Maryland team for that reason. That's another reason I really come out of this game optimistic, is the fact that you have these four guys who can pick up the slack for one another. I think you have four really good scoring threats. And because of that, I come out of this game, and I come out of these first 7 games, 2 against Big East schools, and then 5 against, these first 6 games, 2 against Big East schools, 4 against really overmatched low major opponents, thinking that maybe this Maryland offense has a higher ceiling than I initially thought. And it's because of the talent level of Derek Queen, and because you have these 4 guys that I think can really score and be legitimate scoring threats in the Big Ten. That's one of my big takeaways coming out of these first 6 games. And Villanova, not a great defensive team. They're 116th in KenPom right now as far as defensive efficiency is concerned. So let's not mistake them for some great defensive team. But Marquette right now, sitting at 8th in the country in defensive efficiency. And Maryland had a good night offensively against Marquette, going for 1.09 points per possession. We saw what Derek Queen did in that game, 24 points. We saw what Jacoby Gillespie did in that game, 24 points. So there's a lot of reason for optimism for me around this Maryland offense. Where I do have more concerns, and I'll start offensively, is with the turnovers, because this is the second game against a real legitimate high major opponent. First it was Marquette, then Villanova, where they have struggled with turnovers early in games. Now, to their credit, they've adjusted both times. And things have calmed down in the second half. But it seems like there has been an adjustment period in the first half of these games against these good opponents where they're like a little taken aback, taken by surprise. And I'm hoping that these two games can be used as a learning experience before getting into Big Ten play, because this is going to be night in and night out in the Big Ten. You've got to expect this level of physicality. You have to expect this level of intensity. But that is concerning to me. Now, what's encouraging is the fact that they've been able to adjust and cut down on those turnovers. Turnovers were something that has long plagued Maryland. It felt like for years in the Mark Turgeon era that was a big issue, offensively, or just on both sides, really, turning the ball over too much offensively and not forcing enough turnovers on defense. And last year, Maryland wasn't great turning the ball over themselves on 17.5% of possessions. Not very good. So I am concerned about the fact that early in these games, they've seemed a little lax. They seem like they're maybe not quite ready to go, or they're not quite expecting it. But I love the fact that they have been able to make the adjustments at halftime and improve on those things. So again, I mean, it's a negative, but I still take it as a positive. Now, the one thing that I will say that I'm a little more skeptical on right now is I thought this team, based on Kevin Willard's track record over the years, both at Seton Hall and his first few years here at Maryland, based on the length and athleticism on this team, I thought Maryland could really be an elite defense. And they have been against the Manhattans, the Florida A&Ms, the Canisiuses, the Mount St. Mary's of the world. But against Marquette and Villanova, the defense has not been good enough. It has not been good enough at all. In fact, both of these teams put up big numbers. Both of the star players on each of these teams, Cam Jones, a guard for Marquette, and Eric Dixon, a big for Villanova, have put up monster numbers on the Terps. And now part of it is you say, hey, you got to give credit to them, tip your hat to some great players out of a great conference, guys who have been all Big East, guys who will probably be all Big East again this year, guys who can carry a team and say, hey, sometimes great players make great plays. But there is a concern for me about the fact that they have let two-star players kind of get what they want. I think they made life a little harder for Eric Dixon in the second half, but again, he still had a very nice look at the buzzer to win that game. I thought in the second half and throughout the game, when you have a really good player, especially a big, and Eric Dixon's kind of a unique big because he can step outside. He did hit a bunch of threes. He's a good shooter. He can handle the ball a little bit. He's kind of like Derek Queen, where, he's not afraid to handle the ball on the outside and take you to the basket. But I think with any good player or any star player, and especially with a big, there's kind of two ways to go about it. You can either defend them by not allowing them to get the ball or making life hard once they get the ball. And I thought that Maryland allowed him to get the ball a little too easily. And especially against a team like Villanova, where I mentioned it in pregame, where I felt like Jameer Brickus was really their only proven ball handler. He's really their only point guard on the team. It kind of reminded me a little bit. It's going to be a weird comparison, but bear with me here. It's kind of like those Zach Edey Purdue teams the last few years, especially when Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer were in their freshman season, where, one of the ways to defend Purdue was to put a lot of pressure on their guards and not allow Zach Edey to ever get the ball because their guards were turning the ball over. And that was a real problem for Purdue a couple seasons ago in that 2023 season. And that was really one of the ways that Maryland was able to beat them. A huge win at home at Xfinity Center. Maryland forced those guards into a lot of turnovers and didn't really let Zach Edey touch the ball. And I thought Maryland could have done more of that on Sunday against Villanova. I thought that Eric Dixon was getting the ball a little bit too easy. And that's something that is concerning to me going forward, because Maryland has been very good, and you kind of look at their profile and you look at their turnover percentage, and on the year it looks really great, right? Their defensive turnover percentage, they rank 18th nationally. They're turning opponents over on just under 24% of possessions, which is excellent. But you look at the Marquette game, and they only turned Marquette over on about 12% of possessions. You look at the Villanova game, and it was only 16% of possessions, 10 turnovers for Villanova. That's something that I want to see more of from Maryland going further. So I kind of leave this game wondering, is Maryland's offensive ceiling higher than we thought, and their defensive ceiling maybe a little lower than we thought? Now, something that I do think warrants mentioning is Jordan Geronimo has not played the last two games. He didn't play against Canisius, and he didn't play against Villanova. And if there's anything that Jordan Geronimo is, it's that he's an asset defensively. And after the Canisius game, Kevin Willard said that he had a bruise. He didn't specify what body part, but he said he kind of kept him out, more as a precaution more than anything. He said he could have played. Now, I didn't hear him asked at all in the post-game presser about Jordan Geronimo's status and why he didn't play against Villanova. So I want to do some more digging there and try to find out what's going on with Jordan Geronimo, because it feels like Geronimo's a guy who could really have helped with Eric Dixon. He's athletic, he's long, he's a defensive asset, he's physical, he's a guy who's played in the Big Ten, he was at Indiana before coming to Maryland, so he has experience playing a physical game like that, and I think he could have helped. I would have liked to see if he would have helped. So I don't want to judge too harshly and say this team can't be elite defensively, because we've seen what a Kevin Willard defense can look like, but I'm starting through two games against major competition to have some question marks about why aren't they turning the ball over more? Why are star players on each of those teams kind of getting whatever they wanted in those games? So that is definitely something I'll be watching for going forward. And I want to watch and see. I want to see, is Geronimo back? Hopefully he will play against Bucknell later this week or Alcorn State over the weekend, because then things get real after that. Big Ten play starts next week, next week. First week of December. December 4th, Ohio State, December 8th, Purdue. So you want to see Jordan Geronimo back then, and we're going to find out a lot more about this Terps team and certainly about them defensively as they get into Big Ten play here. So that is certainly something, if there's some things to be concerned about, and believe me, there are. This team isn't perfect by any means. I don't think it's a national championship contender by any means. I would be concerned about the slow starts. Still not the greatest three-point shooting team in the world. And I'm concerned a little bit about them defensively, because it seems like they have been elite defensively against really poor competition, but kind of mediocre against good competition, against power conference level competition. So that's what I'm a little bit concerned about there for the Terps. But all in all, I do choose to leave this game feeling optimistic. One, because they won the game, right? Like, a win is a win, especially your first time going on the road, and I shouldn't say road, the first time leaving home. It wasn't a road game, it was a neutral site game. The first time leaving home for a program that's really struggled away from home, I think it's really good to get that win. Being down and showing the fight, the resiliency, the belief in itself, the confidence in itself, the trust in one another that this team has shown is another huge reason why I'm optimistic about this team leaving this game. And then the talent of Derek Queen and the scoring threats that we've seen in addition to Derek Queen. Between Reese and Queen and Gillespie and Rodney Rice, I think there's a lot of threats there. And it's something I'm really excited about for the rest of the season. That's the show for today. Thanksgiving's right around the corner, so this will be my one and only episode of this week. The Terps get set for Bucknell later this week on Wednesday, right before Thanksgiving, and then Alcorn State on Sunday right after Thanksgiving. But as I mentioned just a minute ago, things are heating up really quickly after Thanksgiving. Terps have back-to-back Big Ten games. Everybody does this early Big Ten stretch here in early December, so I will be back next week with a whole lot more, because the season is really kicking into high gear here shortly. We got Feast Week going on around the country right now. It's a great time of year if you're a college basketball fan, and I can't wait to really kick things up and get into conference play, get into some more big games. So a lot more coming your way, but nothing else for the rest of the week. I'll be back next week. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving. And until next time, this has been the Route 1 Rundown.